Back in 1565, when the Ottoman forces landed on Malta, many believed that this would be the end of the Order of the Knights of St. John. But the battle which began was one of the most important and most intensive fought during the entire 16th century. Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. The Great Siege of Malta, fought in 1565, was without any doubt one of the major battles fought during the 16th century. It is very often considered, alongside the naval battle of Lepanto, as the turning point of the struggle between Western Christian Europe and Muslim forces from the Ottoman Empire. The Great Siege of Malta, fought during several months, ended in a Christian victory thanks to a relief force who managed to land on Malta and to defeat the Ottoman forces during a decisive battle. So, thanks to this siege, the Order of the Knights of St. John remained, and the Ottoman forces didn't secure Malta, which was their primary objective. The game, published by All or Nothing Productions, which is called 1565 St. Elmo's Pay, enables us to recreate this epic siege. It is primarily designed as a two-players game in which one of the players takes control of the besieged Knights of St. John and the second takes control of the Ottoman forces. But it also has a solo mode, which enables us to take control of either faction. It is a game for players aged 14 or higher, and the time of play is somewhere around 45 minutes. Today I'd like to concentrate solely on the solo mode because I have already showed the review of the standard mode, so if you're interested in taking a look at how this game works in the standard way for two players, you can just take a look at this video. Today, the solo mode. So I'd like to briefly explain how the game works in the solo mode, what are its basic concepts, and at the end, I'd like to give you my final thoughts and my final recommendation concerning this mode. So let's begin. Here is St. Elmo's Pay prepared for a new solo game. The objective of the game and the preparation for the game is pretty much similar to the one that we will be using when playing a standard two-players game. There are, although, some subtle differences. So, the first thing that you should do when preparing a solo game is to choose your side. Among the advantages and among the strong points of the solo mode for St. Elmo's Pay is the fact that you can play both sides. So you can choose to play the Ottoman forces or the Knights of St. John. So, for instance, if you choose to play the Ottoman forces, you, as usually, place the three fortresses, St. Elmo, Senglea and Birgo. You place your leader in the chosen frontier, but additionally, you prepare your opponent's forces. So the opposing leader will be always placed in the Senglea frontier on the third row. Then we will be placing two additional cards, which are predetermined, which are indicated in the solo rules, which should be placed on the second and the first row. In both cases, both when playing against the Knights of St. John and when playing against the Ottoman forces, the second card will be a one which generates resources. The enemy deck and our own deck will be prepared in the same way as in the two players game. All the counters, the objectives decks also will be placed and prepared in the same way. The difference will be that when playing the solo mode, we will be using one additional tool. We will be using the resource dial. Now this is a dial which will be used not only to track rounds. As you can see, we have the game round on the upper side of this dial. We also have some modifiers. Now those modifiers indicate the number of additional resources, or the number of subtracted resources that our opponent will receive each turn. As you can see, the number of those resources varies in accordance to the difficulty level that we choose before the game starts. We can play an easy game where, as you can see, the enemy's resources will get a negative modifier from round 1 up until round 5, when this modifier is zeroed. But we can also choose a harder mode in which those modifiers can be very more interesting more challenging in terms of the difficulty of the game. So as you can see, in the hero mode we start with a 0 modifier, but soon it is increased to +1. In the king mode we instantly begin with a +1 to enemy resources. This is important in terms of the sort and the type of cards that our opponent will be able to place onto the battlefield during his activation. Apart from that, the preparation of the game will be the same. Now the objective of the game remains the same. We win the game if we manage to take control of 2 of the 3 fortresses, or if we kill the enemy leader. The third way of winning, so reducing our opponent's deck to 0 cards, is not used because our opponent will not be drawing cards during each turn, and if the opponent's deck runs out of cards, it is reshuffled. After ending the game, we can also check how we scored and how we managed to perform. Checking the number of accumulated points, as you can see, we receive 1 point for each damage token that we placed on a frontier. We receive 5 points if we manage to win, 5 points for each level beyond easy, and final 30 bonus points for killing the foe's leader. All those points are added and we can see how well we performed. So this is an addition to the rules, which enables us to see from game to game how we performed, maybe to keep track of our plays and to try to achieve better results from game to game. When it comes to the play, we start the game because the player is always the first player, and during our turn we will do exactly what we can do in a standard 2 players game. So we will draw cards, we will choose from those cards one of the cards that we want to play during our turn, or we can choose one of our cards already in play and activate it. We can also pass, or we can sacrifice a card. Sacrificing a card means that we remove it from the battlefield and the turn immediately returns to us. Our opponent won't be responding to a sacrifice, but all the other actions, including passing, will make the turn be passed to the opponent, who will do something in accordance to a specific set of rules. But when it comes to our activation, we can, for instance, place a card, paying of course in the standard way, so using cards generating resources or discarding cards from our hand. This doesn't change. But after executing our action, it's up to our opponent to perform his own action. Now our artificial intelligence opponent will be doing actions in accordance to a set of rules. Those rules are described in the solo rulebook, but as you can see, they are described in plain text. So we do not have any diagrams apart from a small indication concerning the placement order of enemy cards. All the other rules are written, so you do have to check them, you do have to search for them, and in general those actions will be using a ranged unit in order to target one of your own cards, or place a new card to the battlefield. Now, placing a card to the battlefield will require our opponent to draw cards from his deck. And when our opponent draws cards from the deck, he will be searching for cards with a cost equal or less to the number of resources that our opponent has. This number of resources is calculated in such a way that we add all the resources generated by cards with the green symbol, and additionally we modify this result by the current rounds modifier. So for instance, on turn 1 playing on easy mode, the number of resources will be modified by -1, bringing it to 0. So our opponent will be now drawing cards from the top of the deck, searching for cards which have a cost of 0, and then he will place them onto one of the spots in accordance to the diagram in the rules indicating where such a placement will take place. Sometimes, if the battlefield is full, our opponent will be searching for cards which will replace other cards, etc. But what I think is that the rules lack a diagram or a player aid indicating all those additional rules, because we do have some priorities concerning the ways that the opponent's pieces will target our cards, where they are placed, because some units, for instance artillery units or bolt units, will be placed in specific places in accordance to the current situation. And what I really liked is an additional document with diagrams indicating first how exactly the forced turns looks like. This is a chart prepared by one of the Board Game Geek users, available to be downloaded from Board Game Geek, and secondly indicating only also the character deployment flow. So those two documents are extremely useful. I strongly recommend you use them if you want to play St. Elmo's Pay solo. This really speeds up play and it enables us to not forget some interesting and important rules. In general, as I said earlier, our opponent will be searching for cards which can be placed onto the battlefield legally due to their cost. If our opponent doesn't have any such cards in his deck, he runs out of cards and his deck is immediately replenished. So we create a new deck, but our opponent doesn't lose, although his turn ends. After executing the action of our virtual opponent, we return to our own turn. We can again execute an action and we can then pass the initiative to our opponent. When we decide to pass, the turn will be ended in a few moments, but first our AI opponent still has the opportunity to react. He can activate all his ranged units and use them in order to shoot against our units, and then he can once again place one final card. The objectives are resolved in the same way that they are in the standard mode, with some exceptions concerning the effects of achieving an objective. Those are at most times or always ignored. And finally, we have also some small differences concerning the way that some cards are played, because on some cards we will get an information that in solo mode they have a different text and different action which is used. But apart from that, the game is pretty much similar to the standard mode. And that's pretty it when it comes to the rules governing solo play of 1565 St. Elmo's Pay. I'd like now to invite you to a brief conclusion. I'd like to share with you my final thoughts concerning this title, and I'd like to give my recommendation to all that consider this, that are wondering if this game is suited for solo play. So let's pass to this conclusion. 1565 St. Elmo's Pay is a game that I have already reviewed on my channel, because I have already spoken about the standard mode designed for 2 players. Today's review is solely concentrated on the solo mode, but I will repeat some of the things that I have already stated during my previous review. Firstly, what I really like in this game, both in the standard and the solo mode, is its setting, because the Great Siege of Malta from 1565 is not a battle which is extremely often covered in wargaming. We do have some titles which are focused on this battle, but nothing very exceptional, nothing nothing which is highly ranked. So this game is still a game which is somewhat about a more obscure event, which in fact was a very important one. So I'm glad that we do have a new game covering this siege. Secondly, when we speak of components and of the quality of the elements that we receive. 1565 St. Elmo's Pay, as it was the case with the previous game of Hold or Nothing Productions, is really top-notch when it comes to the quality of what we receive. I love the artwork, I like the theme, I like the fact that we do have some historical anecdotes, historical notes on the cards. I really like the addition which we received in the solo mode, which is the dial, the resource dial. And here we could ask, did we really need this dial in the game? A small table with the information concerning what is the number of additional resources obtained by our AI opponent would be sufficient. And I agree, it would be. But isn't it much better to receive a high quality, interesting component in the box? Of course it is. And I love this idea. I think it is very functional. It is at the same time, again, an addition which makes you say, wow, this is a high quality component game. So this dial is the only additional thing that you will be using when playing the solo mode, apart the standard which you use in the normal two players mode. In the solo mode, what I like in its mechanical core is the fact that the game is pretty much similar to the standard one. All the rules which were used in the standard mode are still applied, and the rules which govern our artificial intelligence opponent's play are quite easy to understand, quite easy to apply. At the same time, we do not have very complicated algorithms. We do have the same feeling during play. So we will not be having to concentrate on very different rules. There are some small tweaks concerning the way how our artificial opponent behaves. What I really like is also the fact that we receive several difficulty levels. They are all inside the resource dial because the number of additional resources influences the number of the type of cards that our opponent will be able to put inside his tableau during his activation. And starting by the solo mode, we might think that the game is quite easy. It's quite accessible. It's not very complicated to master it. It's not very complicated to defeat our opponent, because at most times he will be placing very cheap cards, which obviously are very weak. But then when we start playing using higher difficulty levels, we suddenly are opposed to very strong opponents who place very expensive and very powerful cards, overwhelming us both with might and zeal stats and making it very difficult to catch up with the development of our tableau. And this is something which I like, because you can easily play the game using the very easy, accessible, lowest difficulty levels, but you can also play very competitive, very difficult to win games using the higher difficulty levels. And this is a good addition because it makes the game different. And believe me, playing the game on the easy mode and on the very difficult epic mode is very much different. When playing games at higher levels, you will have another level of competition added, because normally we do have a competition, a type of a race in which you will be trying to place cards with a higher value or which give you a certain advantage in order finally to achieve your objectives faster and also to acquire local superiority, enabling you to gain one of the free frontier cards. But in the solo mode, when playing against more advanced, more powerful AIs, you will also have to compete in your own tableau. You'll be trying to catch up, placing additional cards on your tableau, because your opponent's tableau will be very quickly full with very powerful cards. And I like this addition because it makes the game very competitive. It makes the game somewhat different from two-player games, in which those games are very often very similar due to the dynamics of the placement of the cards. Finally, I believe that this, although is a game set in a historical setting, it is still accessible for non-war gamers. So even if you do not like war games, you can play 1565 St. Elmo's Pay and enjoy it, because at its core, it's not really a pure war game. It's a game which has a historical setting, a historical flavor, but it has Euro mechanics. It is not a game about a siege. The siege is somewhere there, but it is rather a race game in which you will be trying to be faster than your opponent. And this might be both a plus but also a minus, because for wargamers, 1565 St. Elmo's Pay, or for people who are buying this game looking for a game about a siege, this might be somewhat disappointing. I said already a few words about it during my review of the standard mode. This is not really a game about a siege. You do have some elements which suggest that this is a siege game. You have siege guns, you have those historical additional descriptions, but in fact, this is a game in which you will be racing against time, you will be racing against your opponent, and both sides will be pretty much symmetrical in the way that they are trying to achieve their objectives. You will have to complete all your objectives in your objective deck and then gain local superiority. This is not a game in which you will be feeling this intense siege during which one of the sides will be using different assets in order to block some access entry points, in which it will defend walls at all costs, which will be outnumbered, and the second one which will be storming the walls, which will be trying to starve their opponent to death. So you won't get all this in 1565, and the solo mode doesn't change it. The second thing, which in my opinion is a problem concerning the solo mode, are the rules. I said already that the rules of the base game are not extremely well written. There are some blank spots, and in the solo mode we do have even more of them. But what I think is the biggest problem is the fact that we do have some micro rules, some algorithms which are just described in the rules. They aren't explained in a way which could enable you at one glance to see what to do in a given moment. And when playing this game, I was using the additional charts which were prepared by some of the BGG users, and I must say that before using them, I had to constantly look at the rules and to see if I am using a card correctly. Using those charts was a great addition. It considerably speed up play, and it was so much more pleasant to play. So I strongly recommend you do download those charts and you use them when soloing this game. Again, this is not a complicated game, but the lack of player aids, the lack of those algorithms is something that personally bothered me, and I wanted to have those charts. I downloaded them and I fully enjoyed the game afterwards. Finally, the last thing which could be said about the solo mode of 1565 St. Elmo's Pay is the fact that this is a game which will not suit everyone. This is a game in which you will be having this race theme, but which is somewhat a design between a war game and a Euro game. It does have a historical setting, it does have some historical flavor, but at the same time it uses Euro mechanics in which you will try to gain local superiority It will be a resource management game, a hand management game, so nothing very, very wargamey. So this game won't be appealing for many wargamers, but at the same time, the theme of the game might be distracting for some of the players who do not play war games. They might feel that this is a game totally not for them. So you can also ask how different this game is from the first design published by All or Nothing Productions, in which we could recreate the fight from 1066. And I must say that this game, compared to the first one, is very similar. So an additional question arises: how much do you want to invest in a new game which is very similar to the previous one? Of course, you have a different setting, of course, you have different artwork, etc., but it is played in a very similar way. I leave this question unanswered because it's up to all the users, it's up to all the players who played 1066 to decide. I personally enjoyed 1565 St. Elmo's Pay. I believe this is an interesting design with excellent quality components, with quite a nice dynamics of play, with an interesting time of play. And the solo mode adds something additional. It adds you a competitive mode with different difficulty levels, which I find very interesting. Unfortunately, this is also a game which does have some mechanical problems, especially not in the core mechanics, but in the way that those mechanics were described. So downloading the solo charts, enabling you to better understand, to play faster, will be a good idea. At the same time, this is still a mode which do not makes you feel that you are playing a siege game. You will be constantly having the feeling of playing a race game. Even so, I think this is an interesting design, and the sole quality of the components make this game an excellent thing to discover. Additionally, with its historical flavor, it might be really interesting for some of you. So I recommend you try it if you're interested in this part of history. This was the review of the solo mode of 1565 St. Elmo's Pay, published by All or Nothing Productions. Thank you a lot for watching this review. I invite you also to take a look at our other videos and take a look at our Facebook and Instagram accounts. I hope you will revisit our channel in some time. Have a fantastic day. See you next time.